Good evening. It's 5:30 sharp, and we're going to start, as usual, on time. I'd like to welcome you to the third program of the 2025 series. This is our 33rd year, for those of you who haven't heard me say that previously. And that will, with a drum roll, bring me to turning the introduction of our guest speakers to the indefatigable Bruce Claflin.
I'm going to have to look up that word. Normally, my job is simply to tell you the exceptional background of the speakers, but in this case, we have three speakers, and if I attempted to do that, we would never hear from them. So I'm going to summarize it this way. Our speakers are exceptionally knowledgeable about Maine waters, and it's through both formal education as well as practical on-the-water experience. They've dedicated much of their lives to improving the health of Maine's fisheries, and it's a critically important industry for the state of Maine. So whether you fish for a living, you fish for fun, or you've never held a fishing pole in your life, what they do is critically important to all of us, because the health of the water supports all living things that are here, including us. And so without any further ado, I'd like to introduce first Robin Alden and Ted Ames, who are the co-founders of the Maine Center for Coastal Fisheries, and Alexa Dayton, its executive director. Welcome.
Let's see if I can do this without falling down.
That must be what indefatigable means.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for welcoming us here tonight. My name is Alexa Dayton. I am the executive director at the Maine Center for Coastal Fisheries. This is a post I've really been privileged to hold for the past 3 years. It culminates my fascination and enduring commitment to keeping the state of Maine this wonderful place that it is. I hold a PhD from the University of Maine in fisheries science, policy, and economics, biology, and I dabbled in engineering prior to that, but the real life lessons have come through my work on the water with amazing folks like those we're going to hear from tonight. So I'll pass the mic to Ted Ames to introduce himself, and then we'll keep on going.
Thanks, Alexa. I'm Ted Ames. My wife, Robin, and I did, in fact, start MCCF with Ted Hoskins a few years ago. And we're delighted to have Alexa aboard with us. I've fished commercially for lobsters and groundfish for most of my life, starting with Vinyl Haven, where I grew up, then off to Bass Harbor, and eventually Stonington. I also fished for scallops for 14 years during the mix. So I'm well acquainted with our coastal fisheries. I also have a master's in biochem and taught for several years. And this gave me the tools to start my research into historical fisheries ecology. And started me on a decades-long search of research culminating with a McArthur Fellowship, which really went well with our resource center because we, for a period of time, ran a lobster hatchery and to try to supplement the reports that there were so few larvae being, lobster larvae appearing in Penobscot Bay, that we felt it an important project to start on. My final involvement in fisheries, other than with MCCF, ended after serving 5 years as a member of the Department of Commerce Marine Advisory Committee, which was an eye-opener in itself. Thank you, Alexa.
Thank you, Ted.
I'm Robin and Alden, and full disclosure, Ted and I are married, so if we're finishing each other's sentences, that's just what happens. When I was 21 and taking a year off from college, I was gripped with a vision that Maine communities could fish together if you just took care of the resources, and the resources would take care of the communities. And it seemed like the perfect human endeavor to me in the early 70s when things were kind of upside down. It was like a huge win-win. And so that's led me to a lifelong pursuit of that vision. I started a fisherman's newspaper at that point, Commercial Fisheries News. Ran that for a number of years. Started the Maine Fishermen's Forum, which some of you may know is an annual event that happens at the Samoset Resort every early March and brings together Maine fishermen from the whole length of the coast, and politicians and academics and nonprofit organizations. I left the paper at one point and was Commissioner of Marine Resources during the first King administration. And that was the time when we did the lobster zone management and the trap limits, which is now the the way lobster is managed. So if we go to the next slide, Ted and I, with Ted Hoskins, who was a minister with the Maine Seacoast Mission on the Sunbeam. You sure?
Yep.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
Okay. Started Maine Center for Coastal Fisheries, which is now on the wharf by the public landing in Stonington, so that big building there. We founded it to try to provide what we felt was needed for communities in eastern Maine to be able to fish forever. And that's a little different than a lot of the way people see things. We wanted to provide the local civic engagement and responsibility, local science, and policy innovation to protect small-scale fishing the length of the Maine coast. So in 2012, I gave a TEDx talk, which will give you a sense of what we were trying to do. I said, imagine a place where a resilient economy is based on healthy and diverse fisheries, and over time, that both the economy and fishermen continually adapt to the ever-changing climate and marine system, changing what is caught and sold, working within its bounds. I retired from the center in 2018, and happily, the center is now in the hands of Alexa, and I'm so pleased to be able to support this ongoing mission and the trajectory that you're taking it on.
Thank you. And I don't know how many nonprofits can say they have two executive directors from 20 years working together still to this day with a shared passion. So thank you to both of you. All right, so just a brief outline of our talk tonight. So I want to just reflect on a moment. So why are we here? So I will just say that the job I ever had essentially had the word Maine in it. And you know what? I love this place. I think I love it almost as much as you do. I got a wonderful tour just before coming to this event tonight. And I just want to say that this Islesboro community reflects the values and the type of community that we aspire to build throughout the coast of Maine. And not just build, but thriving, continuing, growing, year-round community, school, shops, people who care about one another. And the fact that you've done it here is really a hallmark. So before we leave here, if you take away nothing else from our talk tonight, the fishing industry, we believe, is the backbone to that success on other coastal communities. We fundamentally believe that fishing, and if you don't care about fish, that's okay, But year-round community stems from that commitment, that involvement, that caring, that deep engagement with the environment that we are here to enjoy. So that place for me is extremely special. And when there are fishermen, we believe there is a year-round community. So we're going to take you through some dimensions of what that looks like. And if it's a bit of a fisheries-heavy talk, we apologize. But we think you're interested in some of the technical aspects. A little bit of the science, a little bit of the management, a little bit of the background, how we got here over 50 years. And so before I get started, I'm going to go ahead and say, this is why we're here. We love it. And local economy really matters. But the problem is we can feel it shifting, right? You come here, you've seen the aging. Bruce described older population is really a problem. As we age out, we need to attract new people, younger people, create local economy for them to want to be here. So let's go ahead and start with our theory of change for tonight. We believe that this right here matters a lot. This is an incredible portrait of what it takes to live in a strong, rural, very, very natural resource-dominated environment. This way of life, we believe, depends on having an owner-operator, near-shore, diverse fleet. And that's different from a corporate fleet that may go out on multi-day trips, right? So let's get into some of those differences and understand why a nearshore dayboat fleet would provide coaches and mentors, and they're home at night, and they have families, and they're participants in the schools. So before we go into what it takes today in MCCF's work to keep this going, we've got lots of projects we can talk about. But I thought you would be interested in hearing from someone we've all grown to love and care about and really respect for his experience. And again, the things I learned in school were nowhere near what I've learned from deep, radical listening to the folks like Ted and the influences that brings. So Ted's going to take us through just a little bit of his background and his journey, if you will, through the groundfish era. Does anyone know what a groundfish is? Come on. Yeah? What is a groundfish? Yeah? What else? Yeah? Okay. Cod, haddock, halibut, flounder. And these generally are caught. They're flatfishes that can be often caught in the same gear type. So Ted's going to take us through the journey of shifting from these species and understanding how we came from a very diverse fishery to where we are today. All right, Ted, take it away.
Uh-oh. We're in trouble. Fishing has changed a great deal in recent years. Historically, coastal fishermen relied on a three-legged stool, different fisheries for each season of the year. In spring, some people set out a few traps and lobstered. Others started seining for herring or ground fishing for cod, because that's the season when they come back up on the shore. By summer, more fishermen were shifting over to lobster fishing, or seining, or ground fishing for cod and haddock. Some would, in the summertime, there used to be an abundance of pollock that would arrive mid-year south of here, but certainly in amongst the islands, in particular Seal Island, while I was engaged there. As the season wore on, towards late summer, many started switching to tub trawling for white hake. Still others kept seining for herring. Now the details that I'm giving you aren't important, but I want you to have the flavor of the diversity that supported the fishery that we all count on. By fall, most had shifted into lobster fishing full-time, and though some hung on ground fishing or seining or herring, fishermen have these loves and they'll pursue a particular species or fishing activity as long as they can before they switch. Come November, a great many people started picking up their gear, their lobster gear, and bringing it in and rigging over for the winter season, which involved dragging for scallops, urchins, or shrimp for a period of time. A few still diehards would still keep their gear in the water and go lobster fishing through the winter. But just a short string, mostly for groceries. Starting in the 70s, things started to change. New technologies began entering the fishery. We had the most amazing electronics entering the fishery, and hydraulic operated equipment, diesel engines. Stern trawling became popular among small and mid-sized boats. It was incredible. We loved it. But a lot of us started to worry too, because it wasn't long before the impact that we were seeing on the species of fish that we made our living on were getting scarcer. I led a group of coastal gillnetters in the 80s and 90s, and we argued in support of placing limits on fishermen in terms of how, when, and where they fished. This was an important approach, radically different from the federal approach, who were only concerned with how many pounds of fish were landed, how much they caught. Well, we'd learned the opposite because of our lobster fishery, where we had, by that time, pretty sound landings limits. You couldn't take juveniles, you couldn't take V-notched lobsters, and in fact, you're not allowed to auto-trawl for lobsters either. And we thought we could get something approaching that in the council system that the federal government had. Wrong. We failed to persuade federal managers that this was a good idea at all. The end result of that is that not only has groundfish management failed to stop the collapse of groundfish, which are pretty gone at this point, except for George's Bank, it's also ended up in Maine fishermen losing their right to fish. These traditional stocks we used to fish seasonally suddenly were part of the federal government's realm, and you needed a federal permit to catch them. And the amount of landings the vessel you were on had was how many fish you were allowed to catch forever after. It doesn't sound like a very good system, and it really wasn't. We lost groundfish. Today there are no active groundfish boats between here and Canada. That's real. From Penobscot Bay to Canada, there is not a single active groundfish fisherman left. There's a couple of thousand full-time lobster fishermen, however, many of which would love to be able to do that again, to try to get on our three-legged stool of spring, summer, and winter fisheries. Not to be. Today there are fewer than 25 federal groundfish permits left in the state. think about it. This state with its rich history of commercial fishing lost it because the feds put the rights into permits which are owned by out-of-state people and who are not interested in sharing them, because if groundfish stocks ever come back, they're entitled to their according share expanded to however many groundfish of that species is left. It's a dead soldier. But groundfish haven't been the only species that we lost either. We lost our stocks of Atlantic herring. That was the driver for a spring fishery. It was practiced by many stop seiners and purse seiners through the summer. And today, a fishery which at one time was producing as much as 100,000 metric tons of product a year is less than 20,000 metric tons. Think of the reduction and loss. Well, that isn't the only loss, because that's the key species for all the gadids, but also for sharks and dolphins and other creatures that are higher on the food web than they. Maine had 2 or 3 permits for herring, but unfortunately they were large boats and they went south and took the permits with them. So here we are. This incredibly rich tradition of fishing these coastal waters and taking care of them with suddenly no finfish that we're allowed to catch out of the mix. We nearly lost our scallop fishery too. It was overfished so badly that we lost, it had to be shut down for 20 years. But we brought it back, and MCCF was party to actually introducing a ground-breaking management plan that basically reduplicated our lobster fishery by creating rotating closures and different zones along the coast. That fishery has come back quite well. We have ambitions to help other fisheries. We have also started rebuilding runs of alewives. Now you may ask why that's a far cry from saltwater fisheries, but then you stop and think. Cod and halibut showed up on the shore each year along Maine's coast at about the same time that the alewives started running in the brooks. So if you're going to rebuild a population of fish, you better have food for them somewhere in the fish tank. And we decided to help to do that. Our fishermen, former fishermen in the gillnet industry and lobster fishermen along the coast have gathered together, and along with environmentalists and First American people have been able to get a lot of alewife rivers operating again. They're coming back. Now the winter halibut is a local success story. They were virtually extinct along the coast for years. They have come back. They created a similar type management structure for them as well, where first of all, fishermen agreed to participate in a tagging study, accumulated enough data so that Department of Marine Resources in the state said, it is time. We need to think about letting you guys catch a few of those. And they did. So for a brief month and a half or so, every spring, fishermen who have learned how to tag halibut and use the appropriate gear are allowed to catch up to 20, 25 halibut per year during that brief window. Of course, the catch is they have to be at least 42 inches long. Why is that? That's the age when they first reproduce. So you're creating a brood stock for halibut as well. That's where things are today. Now we'd like to pick on a few groundfish, but that's a ways to come.
Well, thank you. And so reflecting a little bit on the change over time, you can see in the graphic there, I know you can't read the type, but you can get the point. The big top green part is lobster. Everything else underneath are the species that Ted just took us through. And you can see that over time we have gone from a relatively diverse catch to a relatively lobster dominant catch. But the diversity is key. And so over time, while we want to protect the fish, we want to protect the environment, it's also vital that we protect the fishermen. And so Robin is going to take us through a little bit of a retrospective of history of fisheries management and how and where that has also been a factor. And so when you sit here on the island today, you can connect with the fish, right? We can see it. We can connect with the fisherman. We can see him too. What's harder and more abstract is how there is a regulatory system that operates in Augusta, it operates in Washington, D.C., it operates in councils where there are people who are making decisions about our local lives, and it's vital that we engage with that because what happens in D.C. really matters here in Maine. So Robin's going to take us through a little bit of a history of some of that, and here we go.
I know you didn't come here to have me talk about fisheries management and people sitting in rooms arguing with each other. But I'm going to just give you an overview because with the technology that we have developed since World War II, there is no question anymore that we can win the war against fish. But that isn't really what we want to do. And in order to not do it, you have to have fisheries management. So that's why every fishery is so heavily regulated, because we can overwhelm, you name it, any species. So management right now comes in two flavors, federal and state. And every once in a while they blend, but mostly it's two different approaches. As a rule of thumb, think about federal management outside 3 miles and state management inside 3 miles. The two, state and federal, have really different approaches to management, and the outcomes of over the last 50 years could not be more different either. So federal management has dominated virtually all fisheries. Since 1977, when the Magnuson Act passed, that was the 200-mile limit that excluded the foreign fleets that had been just devastating the stocks off of New England. The purpose of the law was to exclude the foreign boats, to Americanize and upgrade the technology of the U.S. boats, ironically, and to put the first ever comprehensive management on all species for anybody fishing outside of 3 miles. Before that, most management was state level, and it was pretty light duty, and it was pretty much negotiated through the legislatures. It wasn't heavily technical. That act was one of the many national environmental laws that went into effect in the 70s, like the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. And the idea was we're going to be surgical, and we're going to be quantitative, and we're going to do this right. Okay, unfortunately, federal and state management, federal management has been absolutely devastating to the Maine fishery. That graph that Alexa pointed out, that simplification of the ecosystem and the result, our dependence on lobster now, is a result of federal management. The approach is dictated in the Act, and it is highly quantitative and simplistic. Unfortunately, it's also scientifically obsolete. Federal scientists count fish, then they project the sustainable catch, a quota, and the premise that it's based on is kind of an input-output physics model. You can predict the number of fish you'll have in the future by controlling how many fish you take out now. This is implemented, let's say, for groundfish at a large scale. They count the fish from Cape Cod to Canada and then tell fishermen how many they can catch. This is a really coarse approach to a dynamic system. It ignores species interactions, fish behavior, facts like what I wish Ted had told you about, which was the fact that he identified that codfish exist in local populations. There is a local population of cod that used to be based in Penobscot Bay. The federal system purports to be able to predict quantitatively what will happen in the future based on what we do now. So science has progressed since then, and a marine system like this is understood to be a technically complex system. The feds have not caught up yet. The way to deal with a complex system where you can't predict the outcome because it's so complex is to decentralize, to take it down to the community levels. You can't protect a local Penobscot Bay cod population by reducing the quota in the Gulf of Maine from Cape Cod to Canada by X%. You just can't do that. But for 50 years, this is what's been done. Federal managers, and I was on the New England Council that,
Yep,
that's a council, this is a audience of a council meeting in Massachusetts at the lower level. I was on there when, both as a public member from the state of Maine and also as Commissioner of Marine Resources, continued to lower the quotas, stocks decline. Limit number of fishermen, stocks decline. Support consolidation of fishing rights, stocks decline. Then change the baseline so you can claim that you aren't overfishing anymore. Now, as Ted said, the rights to groundfish are owned by shoreside entities, and the fishermen that are fishing them lease the quota. And Maine fishermen have been excluded. So you've heard all that. The good news is state management and what we've learned operating the lobster fishery. Maine state lobster laws now extend into federal waters, and this is a huge concession by the federal government. It took about 15 years of negotiation and argument to get this. But what do we have as lobster rules? Think about it. Instead of counting lobsters and doing a quota, we built the rules on traditional rules like breeders, protecting juveniles. We have what's called an owner-operator rule, which says that the person with a fishing permit has to be the one on the boat. That means you're responsible. Your livelihood is at stake if you're arrested for doing something wrong. You've limited the technology, which is a huge thing. I used to talk to other commissioners from other states, and they would say, well, we can't limit technology. That's not American, or that's, and instead we've limited lobstering to traps. with limited trap numbers, undoubtedly not enough, and we don't have consolidation. Probably the most important thing that we've done as we've had this population boom in lobster is limit geography. Lobstermen are limited to fishing in a zone or two. There are 7 zones in the state, and what that means is that you can't pulse fish following abundance. And so as the lobster abundance moved east along the coast, you would have had lobstermen from further south pouncing on local populations. We were talking about pogies earlier with Bruce, and what happens when somebody from Stonington comes and catches your pogies? That's the kind of thing that geographical boundaries can limit. So I just want to say that this approach that Maine has taken with lobsters is kind of the root of what we're trying to do through the center in all fisheries. And it got huge international recognition when Dr. Eleanor Ostrom, a political scientist, was given the Nobel Prize in Economics for her observations, which included the Maine lobster fishery, that local responsibility and local participation and governance produces better conservation outcomes than top-down rules. So this is the hope that we're dealing with, and we didn't mean to give you the dismal science first, but working at many scales in a complex system and building local stewardship and resilience, that's what's essential if we're going to care for the resources that are going to care for our communities.
Thank you, Robin. And I just want to reflect on that where you used scale. And we saw it today, again, on our tour of Islesboro. The scale really matters. When we try to do things at a scale that is mismatched with the system we're trying to build, we ultimately don't get where we want to be going. But here in Islesboro, again, I saw a scale of community, Democratic, Socialist. What did you say, Bruce? We had them all here. And you can figure it out when you have that kind of a commitment and at that scale. So back to our theory of change with the Maine Center for Coastal Fisheries for a moment. Really, we believe that ultimately when you put together different paradigms and different outcomes, that if you were to have a system where ultimately on the right you had corporate fleets making multi-week trips, the crew might be resident, imported, they're going out for 2 weeks at a time, they come back, and they're really driven by shareholder profits of a corporation that wants to derive a revenue return. What you really get then is management involvement of large corporations saying, managers make decisions to protect our business interests. And while that may be okay, in corporate worlds, when you're talking about a public resource with a community that derives a living from it, we ultimately really want to protect every participant. That's the key here. And so the alternate paradigm that we're introducing to you tonight is that you can have a diversity of species that are prosecuted by an owner-operator fleet where the captain is on board. They go out for the day. They come back at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and offload their catch. They go to coach the school. They go to the participants in their community. The crew can live in the town, and there's housing. And really, when such a person goes to a council meeting to advocate for an outcome, they're really thinking about the future of their next generation. And that's what we see time and time again. It's driven by an interest in protecting that for the future, ensuring that legacy, the handoff, the intergenerational continuity. So we really think that this is an important piece of what makes Maine Maine, and many of our programs are then really with this paradigm on the, you're right, in mind. So let's just take a little bit about what this looks like for the Maine Center for Coastal Fisheries. And how do we get there? You know, Ted talked a lot about fisheries and different experiences on the water. Robin took us through the work that the councils will do. And these are, again, very prescriptive processes in the councils. So Maine Center for Coastal Fisheries has found that there are voices missing at the table. There are voices that need to be empowered at the table. And often they're shy, right? I don't love standing here with a microphone, a little bit nervous. And imagine a fisherman trying to give comment at a public council meeting. It's terrifying. So really, when we think about inviting this group to the table and we're engaging in convening, this is where we generate that collective knowledge. Representation. So this is what it looks like when you go to the Maine Fishermen's Forum. And I'm going to say this is a Maine Lobstermen's Association meeting. They pass the microphone around. You can stand up and speak to that whole group. Again, there's something a little terrifying about it. On the other hand, it's freeing. You can speak up and be heard as an individual. And you will have ongoing conversations with regulators and scientists and managers as a result of your comments. And you're heard. Passing the torch. We really think that that next generation is vital. A lot of gray hair in the fishing fleet doesn't get you the strong bones and the next outlook. And so a lot of our programs, again, are focused on intergenerational knowledge exchange. Not so much formal classroom. It's more meeting the communities where they are. Students are learning in alternate ways. They care about the place too. And so place-based learning has become a core part of what we do. We work with high schools throughout the region. We have 10 different high schools we run a program in. Each of those has 10 students per year. And you can imagine over 15 years of running what is called our Eastern Maine Skippers program. With 100 students per year over 15 years, you get that critical mass. You get that knowledge, you get that hope, and they spark the likes of Ted. I saw him light up when he had a student who was curious and something that he had said about cod and looking for a new cod trap design for the future. So again, we think this is a core component of our secret to success. So I'm going to now take you through. So science, community, and education are the core activities we engage in. They're an approach, a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary approach that fundamentally puts the fisherman at the core. So I'm going to take you through 3 or 4 different project areas, and Ted spoke to some of these. I'm going to let him jump in if you guys want to jump in. But we're going to start with alewives. So I had never heard of an alewife before. I was like, oh, river herring. Oh, yes. The Damascotta Mills. Yes. Alewives are a keystone species. And when you think about alewives, they really are the forage fish that everyone loves to eat. They anadromous species, which means they go out to sea. They have an estuary they'll go up and into, and they will then go out to the open water, and they have this back and forth emigration system. And so that's not unlike Atlantic salmon. And as Ted indicated, those species that are on the coastal shelf, some of those groundfishes have kind of picked up on when the alewives arrive. The other interesting thing, and I've learned this from Ted, is they do have a preferred diet and a preferred flavor of alewife that may or may not have been imprinted on them when they were younger. And so alewives have really become this core element of the energetics of the system. And so anybody know about dam removals in the state of Maine and looking at how we're opening up fish passage? And, you know, that may seem like a large infrastructure project, but this is what we're getting at. When we dammed up our rivers, we blocked the passage. As a result, we blocked the success of this amazing keystone species, and a whole lot of other things sort of went with it. So turning this around really involves a lot of monitoring. We are working with communities. You can see the dots there. These are where we have coastal communities that are actively looking at their own little rivers, their own passages, removing beaver blockages, bringing students out in the spring to count the alewives, to celebrate them, take some samples, get some genetics from them, and really understand what is going on in the rebuilding of alewives.
This is one of those things where it cannot be done even at a state level. It can only be done at a local beaver dam by beaver dam level, and it's an amazing example of this.
Thank you. So again, you can see the counts over time are now being posted on a portal at the Mid-Atlantic Council. We've gotten everyone to submit their data, and you can actually access this. I'm happy to share the link for that. But you can see some of the runs are doing quite well over time, and we're definitely thrilled to see that. All right, my next example, cod, because we were saying how much cod love to eat alewives or to follow them. So that's a picture down there of the great cod fishery that once fed New England. It just can't be understated at how large a fishery that was. It probably, was it bigger than lobster today? Way bigger than lobster today. And so, you know, the fact that it has gone so dormant, and despite all of our efforts to rebuild this amazing fishery, we've laid off, we've stopped catching, we've ratcheted back, we've done everything. What's interesting, though, is here in eastern Gulf of Maine, there is actually a signal that is different from the signal that might be seen at a coarse New England scale. And when fishermen are on the water and saying, gosh, I'm seeing them everywhere, and they look like spawners, and holy cow, this actually is looking like we have a rebound. And Ted, for years, has had these suppositions about spawning grounds. So MCCF is working actively aboard fishermen's vessels now for 15 years. We have a student scientist typically from UMaine or from the department who we train in these activities. And we are on fishermen's vessels hand jigging in a scientific survey to understand, are they increasing, decreasing? If we get a spawning cod, we're doing a genetic workup. And what we're seeing is over time, there is an increase. Here in this eastern Gulf of Maine, the signal is getting stronger and stronger. Is there a connection with the rebuilding alewives? We certainly hope so and hypothesize so. It's still a little early to tell. But nonetheless, the signals are there. An index of a juvenile cod increases are really being detected. And we have caught several spawners on our survey in the last couple of years, which was the first time we've really seen that. And just an amazing hopefulness for all of us. Okay, so one more case study. Scallops. And here's the interesting thing about scallops. It's not just wild caught, right? We have shellfish aquaculture at a scale in our waters that is actually at the scale of a native dayboat fishery fleet, right? So it's not a 300-acre farm. It's not these open water net pens. We have oysters, we have scallops, we have mussels. I mean, I love them all. Don't get me. I could eat all of them all day long. And the wonderful thing about wild scallops is you can actually rig over your lobster boat on December 1st and go wild scallop dredging aboard your lobster vessel. So it's a diversification opportunity if you can get access. The gear type works. But is that enough? Probably not. So our board chair at Maine Center for Coastal Fisheries owns pen-based scallops. He has been testing with a lantern net technique, which is what you see here. There's scallop condos. It's like a laundry hamper that collapses, and it has shelves, and you put the scallops in there, and they have very known growth rates, and these are the world's best scallops I have ever eaten. So he is able to convert from wild capture to a small-scale aquaculture in the summer, such that he is able to keep a year-round scallop fishery going. He does a lot of advocacy. We bring a lot of students out. We're doing a lot of growth rate studies. And we're also looking at the impact of the larvae, so the babies, right? The babies are the limiting factor, both systems. But when you have these two systems together, they make babies for each other, basically. The larvae get into the water column, they drift, they land on natural scallop beds, and vice versa. So, and we're collecting that spat, it's called spat, to seed the aquaculture lines. So again, this is an incredible story about creating diversification opportunities for our fishermen. We want to keep every one of them working on the water, regardless of how big or small the scale is. And diversifying, augmenting, and enhancing your work is vital. All right, my last case study, let's not be naive, lobsters are the dominant. And lobsters have really grown to be the employer of record in the state of Maine coastal communities for, really it's, Stonington lands 50 million pounds of lobsters in a year. We have 350 operators who are doing quite well. That's tremendous, but we need every one of them and more of them to continue to fish. So this is an industrial scale fishery. It has really, over time, grown, and V-notching practices, local conservation, and having boundaries, as well as collaborative units at the Zone Council, have really kept all of this going. So our work often looks like arriving at a council meeting, helping people understand what's being said, following up, connecting the dots between the individuals, and again, keeping a focus on what management measures could have an intended outcome. Sometimes managers need a little coaching on how to think of a problem, and so we bring that alternate perspective that says, you know, you might be thinking that you're benefiting the economy of a few individuals, but you're probably harming the economy of the entire state if you make that decision. So helping managers understand trade-offs in their decisions is a vital piece of our work. So I'm going to wrap up with just a couple of comments related. You've probably heard about whales in the Gulf of Maine and the concerns about whale entanglement, conservation efforts in the lobster fishery. And again, this is to keep lobstermen going. It's really important that we not just have the big guns, adapt to new gear, and be fine, leaving everyone else behind. So we really have to focus on everybody, every man, every woman is along for the ride. So the State of Maine instituted a large-scale survey effort. They're doing underwater gliders, they're doing drones, they're doing plane aerial surveys, hydroacoustic passive detectors to see if we can listen for whales, find out where they are, and manage our vertical lines in the water. How many sailors are in the room? Have you ever had to leave off or, fall off for a couple of pot buoys? I have, and it's really critical that we figure out this risk reduction for whales. And so I'm going to leave you with a little real-time story. This happened recently. There's a total of 377 North Atlantic right whales, and in the middle of February, in the worst of the weather, this new monitoring and survey system detected an aggregation of 97 right whales in one spot, right off Kennebunkport there. And so we always said, oh, they're not here, they don't come here. Well, there they are. And the knowledge is the power, and what I'm just proud to say, our industry was able to, in real time, at a local level, engage one another in the right conservation and stewardship efforts to remove their gear in the dead of winter at risk of losing their gear. And it gives me goosebumps. They didn't have a protocol. This was an unprecedented occurrence. It won't be the last time you hear about it. It won't be the last time we talk about how to deal with this. But the industry was willing to really give up and work together to ensure that we protect every single whale. And the punchline on that story is, so far of the 97 whales that were seen, because they have unique markings, protected species has so far found 85 of them alive to date. And we hope the other 7 are detected. We're all standing breathlessly waiting to ensure that that was true. So this industry cares about its future, cares about sharing the ocean, works together, And it's pretty much the best story we could have, and keeping everyone fishing is really how we're going to keep our towns and our communities vibrant. So climate, anybody seen underneath of a one of our wharfs? They all got lifted in the storms, right? We got storm surges last January. Everything got lifted up, and those legs kind of went wah, 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 wah. And then when the tide went out, they didn't land straight again. So the wharfs looked right, but underneath they were not right. This is significant rebuilding required. The reason I point this out is working waterfront infrastructure is the key to keeping fishermen going, bringing the fish in, and if we lose this working waterfront infrastructure, we don't get it back. So we can get our permits back, we can get our fish back, we can get our everything back, but this is vital. So I'll leave it at that. I wanted to say thank you so much and give Robin and Ted each just a comment to close, and we'll wrap up and give you a time for 1 or 2 questions.
That sounds like a good idea.
Thank you so much. So, a couple of questions.
There's been regular shrimp research, and there's been an assumption that the steady decline of shrimp, because it's a subarctic species, that it just was not able to survive. I will let Alexa might know something more about that, because they've been on a decision to stop.
So shrimp particularly, there were 7 permits issued this year for the first time in 7 years. They were done by a lottery. The lottery did end up going to folks who were largely on this side of Penobscot Bay. Eastern Maine did not get any permits. But again, the fact that there were 7 issued this year after a 10-year moratorium gives us great hope. And when that data comes in, when fishermen are allowed to bring in the species and they get eyeballs on the water, we get a lot more information about what's going on in the species. It's fishermen's science is critical.
So you haven't mentioned anything about sea temperature rise and its impact on the fisheries. I was under the impression that was a growing disaster brewing, and maybe you could just anecdotally add in the introduction of invasive species like green crabs that seem to be ever more prevalent.
Yeah, okay. So the Gulf of Maine is a really interesting body of water, and yes, it is warming, but not uniformly. And we actually get cold water influx from the Labrador current. So it comes down the Scotian shelf, and it eddies back in around the tip of Nova Scotia, and then it sort of does this counterclockwise circular through the Gulf of Maine. We have actually this year been colder than we have historically. So it's not uniformly up and down and not at every level. So yeah, we're seeing things go a little wonky, and that does mean new species, different species, success of certain species, and introductions of others. So we're keeping an eye on crabs, we're keeping an eye on all kinds of things, but the water temperatures aren't unfortunately predictably just doing this. There's a lot of that. And again, that's Mother Nature, and getting access to new species would be, I think, a project for us. So squid, we're seeing more squid. Swans Island, lots of squid everywhere. We currently don't have a squid fishery. Should we? Probably. So that's the kind of questions I think we can be asking ourselves.
Yeah, you mentioned at the beginning of your talk that juvenile lobster numbers were down. I thought that's what you said. Is that in fact true? And is that what you're seeing?
That was before. So at the moment, larval settlement, so it's juvenile lobsters stage 4 are when they kind of become real to the fishery. Before that, there's a lot of life stage failures. We are seeing them hold steady, but we're not seeing them go up. guess it's kind of a wait and see. Early settlement collectors, there's a whole program along the coast of Maine to every spring go out and sample juveniles. And in parts of the coast, it's down. In parts of the coast, it's stable. In aggregate, you might say no change. But again, this local scale really matters. Zone C, where we are in Stonington, we've seen the largest decline, but we also saw the largest increase at some point. So.
And the juvenile settlement index had been way down when we started the resource center. And then after that, it bounced back up. So that was really old history at that point. And now, and this is all the question about water temperature and your question. This is all the variability of the marine system that we're working with, and this is why resilience and adaptation and local observation is so important.
One more question? Yeah, in the back.
Just could you talk a little more about the battle with the corporate federal fishing? You say that's up three miles and beyond. I'm from Cape Cod, and they drag they come out of New Bedford, and they have a certain amount of hours to run, and their holding tanks are 10 times bigger than any local boats, so they basically beat out the local fishermen pretty quickly. I'm wondering, and I was down there when the stripers were running, and 3 days before the season opened, it was rich, and then 3 days, and bait fish, seagulls, it was going to be a great season. Then the draggers came through, and there's nothing after. It's just devastating. And I'm just doing it for sport. I can't imagine trying to do it for a living. Can you speak to that?
It was a rough council meeting when they brought that forward. That is a big question, and that is an equity issue, and that is what Robin was talking about, the interplay between federal and state regulations. The open access scallop fishery that is prosecuted by those New Bedford boats, they're actually allowed to move inshore once they're done picking over their offshore, and the inshore guys can't they're displaced. So that cascade effect tends to displace the nearshore fleet. Once again, a pressure to displace the nearshore fleet. And that's what we say, those management measures really matter. If they were excluded from the nearshore, it would be a different story, right? So, all right, well, thank you all. I just want to say thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. I think we all can be impressed with their mission, their goal, their educating of the young people, and attempt to mobilize the local communities. I loved the story of the right whales and the community fishermen mobilizing to do, quote unquote, the right thing. Most of my life has been in the corporate world, but I can criticize them for being so short-sighted, for managing their businesses to the quarterly presentation of their results. And what you've described is people who are thinking about their children and their grandchildren as the indigenous populations did. And I knew Eleanor Ostrom. Yeah, she was fantastic. She was a great student of the commons, which is a concept that, well, we probably could return to or need more of these days. So I found your talk extremely resonating for me. And could we visit you in Stonington, where your headquarters is? So if you're sailing or powerboating over or going for lunch, then why don't you look them up and learn some more? Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week. And the basket...